Here, and I wanted to say good morning to him.
It's nice.
Yeah, I was going to join him, but I unfortunately have two different appointments.
I can't imagine that you have enough time.
Do you have a wire for Rob also, or just okay, because he'll be doing some speaking.
We're down
Maybe he'll change that. Yeah.
Say hi to him.
You're not going to make a transition to break or smoke or something like that.
Supposed to go now.
I don't know.
All right. Attendance.
Are we moving in, Gene?
Move them out.
Move them out.
Mr. Pryor, go here. You gonna read those newspapers on the way?
No, I can't read those newspapers with you around.
Yeah, well, I'm
because
gonna
you're going
make
to be
sure you
bothering
do.
me all the
You're
time.
darn right. I'm gonna give you a bunch of you know what. For
All
those.
right. Oh,
You're filming this posterity? Yeah.
Mr. Palm Beach.
Town council is represented.
This is not beach wear, but I've got to get some
You're looking good, Bill.
I've got to get the preservation once as well.
You want a bar? Take the seat of honor. Hi, Louis. How you doing? Good morning. Fantastic.
No, I'm the checker.
No, I know you. I was just saying.
He's the grader. It's the legs that attract me. And mine are
Really talk about pale face.
my father used to call me bird legs. But mine are
Turns out that the other
Thanks, I did.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got you. That's me. I'm a chin leader. Hi. Got you.
Did you put a couple of cones in front of the house so the bus can stop?
I'm Jean.
I'm Lloyd.
Nice to meet you.
You want to check me off?
I did.
Good.
Yeah, all right.
Welcome aboard. Glad you're here.
With the tripod, the camera guy is he's going to sit right
The plan of attack is to get everybody's heads filled. Our problem is well, he's using the sensors around. I'm sure we'll be able right now. It's fine.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to go back and forth, so that's really fine. It's just going to put it on here. Okay, so we can just get it back and forth. That's fine. Take us 30 seconds each time.
Peter's here.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. Can you save some seats there? You want to stop right up in your house? We talked about it.
I really don't want him to see it. I got a lot of illegal things in there. Can we go all the way back?
Like the bicycle race.
Lloyd, how are you?
You guys got out.
Good to see you.
Hey.
I think that's partly it. But basically, the core.
I mean, that's useful for us.
It is. The core.
In this process, never that counted. I'm always amazed when cars are.
That's right. The reason that this doing the base reason though is I'd like to ask you a question. What have you not done or has regulations?
I've been pretty much starving writer, so I've done everything.
That's been a
Remain a starving writer.
EPA finally did, but the Corps still isn't ready to.
Hear those reasons.
No. Oh my God.
It's over. There is no further assistance possible. Only in case you can do happen to some relatives.
Have a chair to look at. Yeah, I was there last.
Yeah, I know. I guess that was
Way up here.
good idea.
Was it way up over that?
Right across Jamie.
I saw the best.
this morning.
Mark.
We're gonna have questions, yeah.
Can you introduce yourself?
And that, of course, was the one and only Ned Barnes. Thank you, Ned. Sir? Yes.
Forward.
Okay.
Because I just want to see the mirror.
Okay. Is this
The
good?
ocean. Let's go for it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Rob and I are delighted to have the opportunity to be with you and go from stop to stop. We're going to be speaking on each of the bus rides about the things that you'll be looking at the next stop, and about a few other things related to the shoreline of the town and the issues that we're all dealing with. But I'll be giving sort of some. Pardon me?
Right here.
Yeah, this one here is a seriously eroded area. You'll see one of the things we'll be talking about today is that after the Hurricane Sandy went by, there are areas of town that are very seriously eroded like this, where there's virtually no beach at all, and other areas that have accreted a tremendous amount of sand. And that's a very hard thing to predict from storm to storm as to where those impacts are going to occur, which is why we try to take a global approach and do everything possible to keep the entire shoreline of the town as healthy as it can be. That begins with managing Lake Worth Inlet in an intelligent and proper manner. We don't have direct control over that because it's a federal inlet controlled by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But one of the most important things you'll see as we go up to the first stop at Angler is you'll want to look to the north and see the area at the inlet. You'll want to see the Lake Worth Inlet Sand Transfer Plant on the north side. That is a facility the town operates. And we bypass, in most years, about 150,000 cubic yards there. That's critically important because the inlet is the most significant cause of erosion for all of the beaches of the town. The fact that the inlet is wide and deep, maintained so that the shipping can move in and out of the Port of Palm Beach, it prevents sand from naturally moving from Singer Island down onto the island of Palm Beach. And that has been for now almost 100 years the greatest cause of erosion along our shoreline. So everything that we're doing, whether it's right there at the north end, whether it's in this area of town, whether it's down in reaches 7 and 8 at the south end of town that we'll see later today, is all geared towards restoring the beaches and protecting the shoreline to a great degree to offset the loss of sand that is caused by that inlet. Rob's going to talk a little bit more detail now as we head north about what the sand transfer plant does, about the inlet dredging project that's coming up this winter, where we're going to get a tremendous amount of sand from the Corps of Engineers on the beaches of the north end. But one particular thing we'd like you to be aware of is we've got an unusual circumstance out there right now. Even at the high tide, which is our condition right now, we're going to be seeing these beaches in their worst case scenario, which I think is helpful in terms of seeing where there is more and less erosion that has occurred recently, and what the current conditions are. But you're going to see that even in this state of affairs, that the area that we're going to be standing on at Angler and immediately south of there actually has quite a lot of sand on it. That was one of the areas that benefited, ironically, from the sand that moved around during the storm. To the north of that is an area that usually has the widest beach in town, probably still does have the widest beach in town because there's such an established dune system there. It looks much more like what those of you from the northeastern United States are used to seeing in terms of a dune system, very unusual for South Florida. But there's a deep and wide dune system there, and then there's quite a sandy beach.
Where is that?
That's immediately south of the inlet, and then for several hundred feet south of that. And in Reach 1. And the interesting thing and the lucky thing about what's happened recently is that with the erosion of sand out of Reach 1 and accretion of sand into Reach 2, we have an opportunity to actually receive more sand from this upcoming dredging project than we normally would have been able to receive. So, mixed into this discussion we're going to have today are some bits of good news. Some of it related to some things that have gone right here in terms of managing the shoreline over the last 20 years or so in town. And some things that you get lucky instead of unlucky sometimes, and Mother Nature works in some interesting ways. So We'll be trying to make sure that we share that, as well as identifying the needs and the actions that are being planned to address the areas that are more seriously eroded. So with that, I'm going to ask Rob Weber to come up. He's our coastal coordinator in town. He does an outstanding job of dealing with all of the various details of this, managing the consultants who assist the town in doing the various projects that we do to try to provide the best shore protection that we can across the entire town. And he's going to talk between now and when we get off the bus about some of the details related to the inlet dredging and the operation of the sand transfer plant and the importance of that Reach 1 and 2 area. Yep. Thank you. Sure. Good morning. Right up top. All right, it's on. Yeah. Yeah. Right up tight.
Takes 3
Good.
seconds to warm up.
Okay. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I enjoy talking about the Palm Beach shoreline. I talk about it so much with my wife that she's kind of over it now, so I'm glad I've got someone else to speak to. The first stop we're going to make today is Angler Avenue. It is the southern point of the inlet maintenance activities. The Lake Worth Inlet, as it was constructed early in the 1900s, and the jetties were in place in the 1920s, rebuilt, extended in the 1930s. Shortly after that, we started noticing some problems in the town. We started seeing some erosion. The conditions that we see, the erosion, is due to the lack of sand moving from north to south. Generally speaking, the sand moves from north to south. It's a river of sand, and it's interrupted by the inlets. And because we have such a large inlet here in Palm Beach, sand cannot get across it. It either deposits in the inlet or it gets impounded north of the inlet. There's two ways that we get that sand back restored through the littoral drift, or the movement of sand from north to south. One way is with the sand transfer plant, and that's a fixed building on the north side of the inlet that transfers sand that comes down to that location. It gets pumped underneath the inlet and deposited immediately south of the inlet. That project, that activity, generally brings about 150,000 cubic yards of sand a year across the inlet. Another activity that we do, or that we work with the Corps of Engineers on, is the inlet maintenance dredging that occurs usually about once a year, sometimes every other year. This upcoming project that's scheduled for January of 2013 is expected to bring about 280,000 cubic yards of sand from the inlet, the channel itself, and the expanded settling basin, which is immediately east of the sand transfer plant. Excuse me?
You're right. You're right.
Yes. And that sand is going to be placed on the beach from the inlet jetty, the south jetty, all the way down to Angler, which is our first stop. So when you get off of the bus at Angler and you look to the north, from the point that we're standing to the north is where all the sand is going to be going for this upcoming project. The Angler Avenue area is also the proposed site of the second discharge for the sand transfer plant. Because the placement area for the Corps' dredging material is north of where we are and it's within the shadow of the jetty, the sand does not move down drift to benefit the other areas of the town as it would had the jetty not been there. So this material, that one of the considerations is to place a second discharge at the Angler Avenue area, because we know that's where we're outside that shadow where the sand will move from a northeast type wave. We lost some materials here. From the northeast type waves to keep moving that sand towards the south. So as we approach Angler, you're going to notice today that the beaches in this area are a little bit wider than they had been immediately after the storm, as you can see in the picture that I've got in the handout.
the condition that's at Angler right now, you're seeing some recovery from Hurricane Sandy. Each beach has different levels of recovery, different time frames on how quickly it can recover. One of the problems that immediately south of the jetty has is that because it's in the shadow of the jetty, it can't recover as quickly as an open coast can when you've got the natural conditions. So the northern portion of Reach 1 is not recovering as quickly as Angler Avenue, but Angler Avenue, the sand will continue to move down the beach. It's going to be difficult to see today at high tide and also because of the wave conditions, but there's a lot of sand deposited in the near shore. After a storm event, the sand moves from the dry beach and moves cross shore, moves east, moves seaward into a near shore bar. And then the more gentle, normal waves, especially ones coming from the southeast, 2 feet or less, the smaller waves, will slowly bring that sand back onto the dry beach. Anything else I'm missing?
Maybe mention just that it narrows down real fast from Angler, so this area here is where we have a begin and extended area.
And it's 17
Okay.
that means a lot.
This particular area that we're driving through right now is what we call Reach 2. There's a limited amount of work that can be done in this area because of the nearshore resources. There's a lot of coral reefs and hard bottom that is immediately offshore, so it's limited to what we can't do a large-scale beach nourishment in this area. So we need to heavily rely on the sand coming from the sand transfer plant and the inlet maintenance dredging efforts to continue making the sand come across the inlet and move south and down the beach.
Could you explain what hard bottom is?
Hard bottom, yeah.
And why it's a problem?
Hard bottom, if you go offshore and you put your feet in the sand, that's essentially soft bottom. Hard bottom is rock. There's some rock features that are under the water, and that's where the corals and other algae and other organisms they attach to it and grow. So that's why when we talk about protecting hard bottom, we're protecting the resources that grow on the rock itself.
If you cover the sand complete, our sand covers it.
Right.
We'll cover more of that as we try.
Are we going to stop at Angler so we can get out?
Yeah, right where the cones are.
Where the cones are.
I think so.
Yeah.
Ned?
Right, that's where you go.
Maybe a little further on.
Good spot. Yeah, same idea.
Yeah.
Trying to help people not get their shoes wet.
Now, because of Sandy, the sand transfer plant is inoperable right now. There is some work that needs to be done to repair it. The sand that would normally be coming across the inlet is waiting for us, waiting for the plant to be fixed. I was across the inlet the other day and noticed that a lot of sand is stockpiling at the north side of the inlet there. So hopefully we can get this
What's the timetable for the repair?
timetable for repair. Probably early spring. I mean, somewhere March. Yeah.
This is allowed to be stopped. How long is it?
Yeah, go ahead and stop here.
The flow of the sand. What's the natural flow?
It's that's different with every section of the beach. Generally speaking, 1 mile a year is what a lot of engineers use, but that's an overstatement.
We overshot.
I can turn around.
Can you?
Sure.
That would be great. Go back a block or two.
This is Reef Road.
Down there is an inch road.
This is not Angler.
We got a public access at Angler, but we overshot it.
But we're gonna
This
go
is
back
Reach
to
2.
club, which will
Reach 1 is about 2,300 feet south of the inlet. The town is broken down into 8 reaches. The reaches have different shoreline orientation, different coastal management methods that can be done to manage those beaches. There's different upland features, whether it's influence from seawalls or the inlet jetty. The reason why Reach 1 is smaller and unique is because of its direct influence from the inlet. The next reach is Reach 2, which
tell you when to take a left.
extends for about 2 miles down to the Wells Road area.
Go left here and then one more left in a minute.
The Midtown project is between reaches 3 and 4.
We have 15 minutes.
Okay. Did you want to make that announcement, or?
You can tell.
You can see the rack line, which is the debris or the vegetation that's washed ashore from Hurricane Sandy. You can still see some remnants of how far the beach came up from that storm, and you can see the new sand that has been brought in naturally as the beaches have recovered. So there is a mound of sand.
That's what that
where
plateau is all about.
that's where that sandbar has affixed back to the shoreline, that area. Right.
Left on Angler, and then park on Angler.
A lot of that is because of the wave energy that's received to this area. North of it in Reach 1, where the inlet jetty is there, the waves can't interact with the shoreline there, so that's why you haven't seen as much recovery in Reach 1.
Right.
But Reach 1 also, in normal conditions, doesn't get impacted like other reaches do because they're in the shadow of that jetty.
No, the next one.
Yeah, Rob.
Yeah.
Has that kind of a scarpment, and it has a lake inside it.
Yeah.
Is that what that's
Yeah.
caused by?
Yeah, it's the new sands that the new sands brought in. Right. Sorry, I should have looked. I wasn't looking.
This actually worked out better because now we can just head south. We would have had to do this anyway.
Yeah. Do we need a... All right, we're going to be getting off the bus very soon. The Angler Avenue access point, which is a town right-of-way, is directly east of us.
Yeah,
So
go
we can get off the
up a little
bus and
farther.
we'll be walking across the street
Yeah, it's
through the open way right here at Angler Avenue, just to the left of this trash can. And you can make your way onto the beach.
yeah.
Right here is perfect.
Shadow of the
Okay.
reaches. It's
You gotta go that way.
not a line. It's
Okay, I'll explain that. Yeah.
and I know nothing.
How we doing?
It might take a few minutes. There's about 60 people getting off the bus, so.
Alrighty.
All right.
A lot of help.
Oh, it's from the Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was gonna see if that problem is easy. But we drove up along the beach. There wasn't much beach there.
Peter, did you want this for your Peter? Did you want this for when we could?
Sure. Yep. Good idea. Thank you.
She wants me to mention some things that Mayor asked me.
Okay.
Get going again about what a reach is. And
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll do the general stuff.
Can you guys also point out that Reach 2 is the most eroded beach on the island? This is very atypical of Reach 2. You know, that if you go 4 blocks this way, it's hitting the seawall
Right,
at high
right.
tide, and there's nothing here. Because these guys are all getting the impression, they're all commenting, this looks great.
No,
Reach 2's
right.
fine.
That's what we already said. We will say again
Oh, I
that
didn't
this
hear
is
it.
very unusual
You said it, I
condition.
didn't-
It's a
yeah,
very
you
unusual
said it was
condition.
unusual, but you didn't say that Reach 2 is the most
tried.
eroded beach on the
They had
island
to stick it-
historically, and that if we were to go 4 blocks south of here, it's hitting the seawall right now.
okay.
And that
Right.
would be very important.
And they saw
Sure,
that
people
at the
coming-
country club.
Yeah, but I heard people saying as they're walking up,
Right.
this beach is great.
I understand.
Reach 2 is fine. So I'm just worried that, this is...
Reach 2 isn't
Right
fine.
now, Bill Bryan wouldn't even have a problem with the pipe because he wouldn't
I
even
know,
see
that's
it.
the truth.
You know, we could hide it
Right.
right now, but I mean, normally, it's just not normal. So as long as you at least make that really clear,
Sure.
I'm okay.
You just need to point them out in that direction.
Right.
Exactly. That's why. Understand we can't stand there, so we're going to places where we can stand but see north and south to understand the differences.
He did not point out that Reach 2 is the most eroded beach on the island, and
Okay.
that Reach 2 really is bad, 4 blocks from here. Yes. That's right. That is
Yeah.
typical. This is atypical. That is what we've got for most of Reach 2. They'll point it out.
So where's the property line now?
Pardon?
Where's the property line?
The property line is
15 feet above the high water.
yeah, but then the next line, it's actually right at the high water mark. What they call mean high water is the state law. That's where the boundary. Here again, then the property line will be back here. So.
This beach is a travesty. I don't know how they deal with it. We're down at Reach 8.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
what
Well, but look, 200 yards south, and you can see, and actually this beach is usually about half this width. This is right. You're standing on the spot where it narrows down. That beach is usually as wide as this and then some, because it's in the shadow of the inlet. Okay. That's where all the material comes out of the sand transfer plant and everything. So Reach 1 is always healthy.
Okay.
Reach 2, where you're standing,
Right.
is the end of that benefit from the transfer,
Okay.
and then it turns quickly to this, and it goes on for the rest of Reach 2. There's really no beach at all.
But one thing, when the guy was talking about it, it's the principle. It goes south, it sits in the sandbar, the little waves bring it over.
Right.
The waves are going over the sandbar, so it sits. Our way.
The gentler waves will bring it.
And the big waves go over it, so it doesn't move, right?
The big waves actually can do more harm. They definitely don't bring it in, and they
no.
sometimes actually can
Take it
can
out.
chew it out. Yeah,
That's
so-
how we get our beach. It's just a natural southern flow.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
If I can make this work. Can everyone please get back on the bus? It's not working. Would everyone please get back on the bus? No. Okay, lead them back, Bill. Good, Donald. How are you? Ooh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, what I was saying is that if you get... Let me be on this side. I'm fine. Okay.
I didn't turn this off. Did I mess you up?
Where the pipe will come out? No, with this on, with the film on. Oh. Yeah. So what do you want me to say? I basically just want you to say, this is where the proposed pipe will come on. All right. Is this on? Yep. This is on? What? This is on? Okay.
Say it again, Mike.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Gotcha.
All right. Okay. What do you want me to say again? Look over at me this way.
All right.
Okay. So what is going to happen up on this beach?
Well, the expectation is that the second pipe is going to come out of the sand transfer plant and end up somewhere on this beach just outside of Angler Avenue, right along here, on the dry beach, not out in the water.
Okay, good. You got it? Perfect. Thank you,
Star is
sir.
born, I'll tell you. Print up a couple of copies of that. Distribution only.
Yes, that's okay. I got it. Okay. Okay, so yes, we are. We're going to head down to Midtown now, and before we get there, Rob will take a couple of minutes and give you some details about the Midtown project. That's our longest beach nourishment project in town, the one that we've been, area of the shoreline that we've been actively managing for the longest. We've had 3 different projects constructed there since 1995. But before we get to those details, I want to talk about some of the bigger picture of the shoreline management challenges in Palm Beach. We have, as we leave this Reach 1, Reach 2 area, this situation where Reach 1 is protected mostly by the inlet, and so the current condition is very unusual. We've had the storm impacts that have moved some sand out of Reach 1 and into Reach 2. But normally what we have is a very well protected, very wide beach in Reach 1. It narrows down quickly at this section of Reach 2, and the remaining area of Reach 2 is the statistically most eroded beach in town. There are pretty extended areas where there's just seawall and wet beach. There's no dry beach there. We have that condition elsewhere in town. Most particularly, I know some of you recognize that in the south end of Reach 8, we've got the same situation, and we actually have pockets of it in a few other places. Right now, at this moment, we have it in more places than usual. You saw on the way up here between Sunrise and Wells, a situation that is right now in that condition, but is rarely in that condition. We usually have some dry beach there. So this tells us a couple of different things. It tells us that we do have areas of town that need attention more than others. It also tells us that the situation is very dynamic and always changing, and that'll especially be true in periods like where we are right now after a storm situation. So the challenge for the town, all of us together as a community, for the town council and the mayor as the ultimate decision makers, for staff helping them do that, for their shore board group of citizens that is offering really intense review of these issues and advice to the mayor and town council about them. All of us collectively are trying to plan appropriately for long-term management of the beaches. We can't just react to situations like what we have in the current situation. We're going to have for this winter, some immediate challenges based on the more eroded condition than usual along our shoreline. But so far we don't have any structures that are in jeopardy. We don't have situations like we have actually north and south of us right here in Palm Beach County where emergency work is required in order to protect buildings, literally, and other physical improvements from falling into the ocean. So we're fortunate in that, and it's important that through all of this we maintain a long-term perspective, how to intelligently invest the resources of the community to provide additional sand, to provide structures where that's an appropriate part of the plan, and to manage the shoreline. It's always going to cost millions and millions of dollars to do this. That's the nature of this kind of work. We can't stop doing it and just leave ourselves to whatever comes with Mother Nature because we know the power of these storms. But we also don't have an endless supply of money. And so the great challenge is to find the happy medium where we are doing all the necessary things to provide shore protection at the most affordable cost for the community. That process has been, a new chapter of that process has been underway. These past several years, the Shore Protection Board has been reviewing a lot of different aspects of this. One other thing, just in terms of definitions, we refer to reaches, Reach 1 and Reach 2 and Reach 7 and Reach 8. We're here in Reach 2, along this area of the seawall that is maintained by the town is going to be actually replaced by the town in the next few years. At the base of it, there are boulders that the town placed several years ago in order to protect the wall and protect this roadway and the utilities that are underneath it. That's called a revetment, which is where you place large rocks to give greater stability and protection to the seawall, which in turn protects the road. We call these reaches because that's the term of art for the coastal engineers. But when we talk about reach 1 or reach 2 or reach 6 or reach 8, those are just segments of the shoreline. So reach 1 goes down about to where we were standing out there a few minutes ago. Reach 2 goes down to just north of Wells Road. And then reaches 3 and 4 are the Midtown project that Rob will speak about in a moment. But back to the planning effort that's underway. So there's been a lot of work that's already been done to develop a tentative plan of action for the next 10 years. The various projects involved most of the reaches of the town and vary in the potential cost, because there's some areas where we might be doing some structural work along with sand if we're allowed to do that. Some other areas where there are other details of the projects that are not completely refined at this point. But overall, the cost of that project, that program, would be between $60 and $100 million for the 10 years. So it's a tremendous amount of money, no matter how you cut it, no matter what the final decisions are. Because of that, the town council has hired a firm called Woods Hole Group. They're out of Massachusetts. They are very highly regarded in terms of their expertise and their knowledge and experience in these areas. And importantly in this, because of the magnitude of the decisions and the funding issues that are involved, they're completely independent. We have a team of coastal engineers that are licensed to do this in Florida that give us very specific advice about the specific projects. But we wanted to make sure that the advisor on what is the right plan overall would not be somebody who would have a potentially vested interest in designing or helping us execute our projects here. And Woods Hole is ideal for that, and that's why they've been retained for this project. Woods Hole is now 80 or 90% finished with their effort to review everything that has gone on in town since 1999, and all the planning, the tentative plan that's been established for how we would move forward for the next 10 years of coastal management here. And we anticipate receiving their report in January. The timing of this tour today is outstanding because you're getting a good detailed background and feet on the beach, a little sand in your shoes, to understand exactly what it is that we're grappling with. The decisions related to which projects and how much and where to do structures and where not, and what the overall cost of this to the taxpayers will be, those decisions are going to be made during the first half of 2013. So we're right on the verge of where this Woods Hole report will come in. We'll be having a series of meetings to review that report and to give detailed consideration to the whole plan. And we're expecting town council to be making the decisions related to the scope and the funding of the 10-year plan during the spring and early summer months of 2013. I'm going to talk a little bit later in the trip about something called the Beach Management Agreement, the BMA, which is another very important part of our big picture of coastal management here in town. But I want to hand it over to Rob right now so that in the remaining part of this segment where we're on our way down to Midtown, he can give you some details about the project there and what you're going to see.
Okay, I'm back on. The Midtown project is the first beach nourishment project of the town, constructed since the modern coastal management efforts started taking place when a planning document called the Comprehensive Coastal Management Plan that was completed in 1986. This project was constructed in 1995. It focused from the Clark Avenue Beach to the south end of Midtown, which is what we call Reach 4. This project placed about 1 million cubic yards of sand in 1995. These projects are designed with to have a specific project life of about 8 years, and how that's put together. Excuse me.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye, Sam.
These projects have a design life. We try and keep it around 7 to 8 years. For the purposes of Midtown, it's an 8-year life cycle, and the way that we determine the life cycle is based on erosion rates, and the erosion rates will help you backtrack into how much sand is needed to help have the project last for that period of time. The 1995 project did last the 8 years. In 2003, the project was renourished. There was a you're going to hear a lot of terms about adaptive management, and there's things that we've learned along our process of constructing projects that we're going to do. to maintain efficiencies, whether it be for cost or for the project in general. But in 2003, the project was expanded to include the Reach 3 beaches from Wells Road down through Breakers.
Go ahead, Rob. The only thing you might want to add is why that Midtown was chosen and where the water was at the point that was.
Okay, good. The question up in the front here is why was Midtown selected as the first place to do a project? And one of the reasons why, and I was not here at the town in the 90s, but the beaches were to a point where the water was hitting the seawall at Midtown, and there was no recreational beach. There was the roadway was threatened. The seawall is pretty old. There was a revetment done, just as there was a revetment built when we drove past the North Ocean Boulevard on Reach 2. There was a revetment placed first, and there was an urgency to place sand to maintain the integrity, to keep the integrity of the roadway. So the project was constructed in 1995, again in 2003. Now the 2003 project was hopefully to last 8 years, just like the first one was. But unfortunately, we were impacted from Francis and Jean in 2004 and Wilma in 2005. So the town performed another beach renourishment in 2006 with some assistance from the state and federal government for effects from those storms. The 2006 project placed sand again in Reach 3 and Reach 4, just like the 2003 project. It was the same footprint. And since 2006, the town has been influenced by other tropical storms, most notably before Sandy was Tropical Storm Faye in 2008, and the town received some FEMA assistance for a partial nourishment, which was done in 2011. There was about 50,000 cubic yards placed in the Midtown area, right near from Clark Beach to the Gulfstream Road area. So that project is the 50,000 cubic yards that was placed was to help get the 2006 project to back on that 8-year life cycle. Now, the influences from Sandy, we have survey data that is currently being collected, and we'll see the impacts from Sandy following the data collection. Anything else? Yeah. Do you want to talk about the federal? Federal? Yeah.
Right, yeah, so we can go up onto that platform, even though the restrooms are closed, yes. Okay, a couple of additional details. First of all, we're passing the Clark Avenue beach right now, which is a public beach of the town, and you can see the condition here is actually pretty good too. One of those phenomena in a post-storm situation where some beaches actually benefit as the sand moves around along the shoreline, and then many other places suffer erosion. We've done pretty well here at this part of the Midtown project. As we go further south, you're going to see when we get off, there's a viewing platform that's going to help you get up and get a little bit of an elevation to look up and down the Midtown beach. And you'll see the groins are exposed. There are rock groins that were constructed as part of that 1995 project. And there's 11 of them here within the project area. They provide some additional stability to the beach, help the sand stay in place. They're normally buried, or in some winter conditions when we've got heavier seas, you might see just the ends of them. Currently, there's quite a bit more of them exposed. So the downside of that, of course, is less shore protection while we're in this post-storm condition. The upside is for today's tour that you actually get a better understanding of the structure of the groin and how it does provide an element of protection to the sand, allowing the sand to stay more stable and provide the protection to the seawall and to the road. Rob mentioned that he wasn't with the town in 1995. I'm not sure what grade of school he was in, but we won't go there. I was with the town in 1995. I looked more like he does today. And it is amazing when you look at the situation here. We've got a reasonably healthy dune on the backside of this beach. We still have some sandy beach, even though we've had this very stormy condition. And the seawall is now very fully protected by what's out there. The seawall, in turn, is protecting South Ocean Boulevard and all the utilities underneath it, and there's major utilities in this segment of town. We've got these condominiums on the west side, and this is the longest area of public beach in the town. And it's that combination of circumstances, the critically eroded situation where we actually had this roadway threatened. You could stand here and feel the vibration, and all of the public infrastructure that was underneath it. That, along with this being a long segment of public beach, was why this was the first focus for town action in back in the 1990s when the active beach management era began. We've got a moment when it's not raining, so I'm going to be quiet about it now and we'll get off. We'll talk a little bit more about Midtown as we leave in a few minutes, and then we'll move on to talking about the south end of the town. Okay. A little bit more about the Midtown project, and then we're going to talk again about some of the bigger picture challenges. The permitting, environmental permits is huge in that. We were asked while we were looking at this site about the groins that are here, and how come we do have 11 groins here and we don't haven't constructed groins in the Reach 7 project. We'd like to construct some structures there. There's a general consensus that some structural elements there will probably provide some additional benefit in the Reach 7 project. The engineering is very complicated. It's inconclusive at this point, and the environmental permitting it makes it hard to get a groin. The state of Florida has taken a position, and we know that there are other parts of the country where you see groins as a more common element of shoreline protection. But the state of Florida took a position a long time ago, back at least as far back as the 1980s, I think as far back as the 1970s, that groins were not an appropriate solution except in relatively extreme circumstances because they interrupt the flow of sand. Because what the state of Florida's environmental protection position was we should do everything we can to naturally mimic or to mimic the natural processes. Putting sand on the beach and allowing it to move from north to south in a natural manner rather than trying to hold sand in one particular place. That's not wrong, because it is indeed empirically true that the groins do hold sand in the location where they exist, and that can create a smaller kind of condition, like the broad problem that we talked about at the beginning of the trip related to the inlet and the interruption of the sand and how that harms the whole island. So that's a real issue in designing intelligent projects. The problem for us is that this is such expensive work that you want to do everything you can to make your placement of sand last as long as possible. Stretch out the amount of time in between dredging projects when you have to come back and place some supplemental sand. So we do like, as a builder of projects and with our responsibility to protect the community, we want to use structures in those places where we can convince the environmental permitting agencies that it's a responsible thing to do. At Midtown, they agreed to that. We had a situation where we had a experimental reef that had been constructed in the Midtown area, and it had failed. It was actually causing more erosion in that area rather than reducing the rate of erosion. And so we had those concrete units that were there that would have to be disposed of, and we had a critical erosion situation, and we had a long stretch of public beach where there had been groins historically up until the mid-1980s, and we had the infrastructure that was threatened on the underneath the roadway on Ocean Boulevard. And the total circumstance there caused the state and federal government to allow the town to reuse the PEP reef units as the spine underneath those boulders to build the 11 groins there. It is still possible to get a permit for a groin today, but you have to demonstrate exhaustively that you've got a unique spot along the shoreline where there is erosion that's occurring faster than it does in the area around it. We have such a situation at the south end of the Midtown project, and the state has indicated an openness to allowing one additional groin at that south end of that project, just to provide a little additional stability. If we can keep the south end of the project from eroding as quickly as it has in the past dredging projects, then the entire Midtown beach will stay in a more stable condition. One last thing I want to say about Midtown, and we'll move on to talking about the other segments of beach. Let me mention right now what you're passing is called Reach 5. In Reach 5, we have some environmental challenges because of the nearshore rock. We also have a situation where sand moving down out of Midtown has provided some benefit to the Reach 5 beach. So we'll never have a beach in this area that is as wide as what we try to maintain at Midtown and down in Reach 7. But there has been, right now it's again one of those locations in town that is in a very, very eroded condition. But we have, over the last 15 years, been able to keep this beach in, generally speaking, a slightly better condition. It's not that it's in the same condition as if there had actually been a constructed beach. But one last thing about Midtown, that is a good example of why active beach management is so important, and that's why we're trying to do it down in Reach 7. If we can get a permit to do something in Reach 8, and we'll be talking about that again before the trip is over. And what we do up around the inlet area to try to make sure that area stays as healthy as it can. The reason we do active beach management is because when you can do it repetitively, when you can design a project that works and come back and occasionally place some more sand into that area, you do create a level of stability that just isn't possible along the built shoreline of Southeast Florida. There will always be erosion, and if we don't actively try to do some level of activity to offset those erosional impacts, then we'll go back to managing crises. So we try to do active management in order to prevent those crises, and the Midtown project has allowed us to do that. Even today, in the condition that you saw it, where it is, and it's probably most eroded condition that we've seen it in the last decade, it is still providing very substantial shore protection to that seawall. The seawall is protecting the roadway and the infrastructure underneath it. It's a success. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. The sand that's out in the beach is intended to provide the protection during storms so that we don't have seawalls failing and infrastructure being lost. So we're trying to accomplish that same outcome elsewhere in town. Remember that at that location we've been at it now for 20 years and had built the project 3 times. As we head now down into the south end of town, we'll be in Reaches 7 and 8 once we get past Sloan's Curve. And actually, before we do that, one thing that's probably worth a quick mention is in Reach 6, we're going to go through Widener's Curve in just a minute. Between Widener's and Sloan's, that's called Reach 6. There isn't any town active project for Reach 6 because we've talked before on this ride about revetments, about where large amounts of large stone is placed to provide shore protection instead of doing beach work or other structures. The state of Florida, as a Department of Transportation, built an enormous revetment to protect South Ocean Boulevard in this location. After South Ocean Boulevard was lost to a storm back on Thanksgiving Day of 1984, the road was severed. It was closed for a year or two. DOT came in and rebuilt the road and built the revetment to protect the road. They've since been back to build up the revetment a few years back. So this is a very well protected area, but with almost no sand at all. It's a very different, very hard structured method of storm protection here in Reach 6. You're going to see that in just a moment as we go around this curve. South of this, as we go around the next curve into around Sloan's Curve and down into the south end of town, we'll have the Reach 7 and Reach 8. Phipps Ocean Park is the north end of the Reach 7 project. We had originally designed that and wished that we could construct the project up all the way to Sloan's Curve in front of the condominiums there as well. But there is, again, hard bottom, nearshore rock that is an environmental permit impediment to that. So we've built what we've been allowed to build there, which is a sand project so far, running from Phipps Ocean Park down to the Ambassador. Currently, it is being expanded to go all the way to Kreuzler Park, which is a small county park just north of Lake Worth Beach. Pardon? This is the revetment that I spoke about a moment ago, where the DOT is protecting the roadway with the rock rather than with more natural shoreline protection. In Reaches 7 and 8, we have constructed once the project in Reach 7. We have also proposed and pursued permits for projects in Reach 8, but have so far been unable to get a permit that would allow us to construct an improvement there other than small-scale dune restoration. We'll talk more about that Reach 8 situation when we head on down to the Lake Worth Pier, because you're going to get a great look looking north into 7 and south into 8 when you're standing out on the pier. But right now I'm going to hand it over to Rob so that he can talk about the Reach 7 project and the conditions at Phipps Ocean Park and south of there.
The narrow beach here in Reach 6, the Phipps Ocean Park and the northern portion of the project erodes much quicker. This in Midtown, we had a similar situation in 1995 where the beaches would erode in the northern portion, and the way that was resolved by adding more sand north of it in the Reach 3 area, we've done adaptive management in the Midtown section. Unfortunately, that same condition can't be had here in Phipps Park because of the natural hard bottom reef that is offshore of the Sloan's Curve area. So one of the ways that the town is working with the state and federal government for the next beach nourishment project in Phipps is to have a more density, to have more sand, a more slug of sand placed at the Phipps Park area, and not have it as even, and have it we know it's going to move from north to south, so we want to have a larger amount of sand placed at Phipps Park and monitor that. Because of the, as Peter was talking about earlier about permitting hurdles that we have to go through, we would like to consider coastal structures in this area, but we need more monitoring data. The state has advised the town to do another project with sand and then monitor it for a period of time to see if structures are absolutely necessary. We need to announce that we're going to be going to...
Yeah, we're going to walk up the ramp, and then people who want to walk further to the south end and take a look down at, on the beach or at the beach can. Okay. But people who don't want to walk that distance would be able to take a look at the beach from the lifeguard building.
Okay. A couple quick announcements as we get to our stopping point here at Phipps. If folks would like to go onto the beach, you can walk up the ramp here and take the beach access right near the yellow flag to get onto the beach. For folks who don't want to get onto the beach but want to see the conditions, you can walk a couple hundred feet. Once you get to the top of the dune, the top of the walkway here, you can walk south a couple hundred feet to the lifeguard stand, and the lifeguard building is open today. So if folks would like to go into the lifeguard stand and see the view, an overview from the lifeguard position, you can do that as well.
Tell me what, about 20 minutes. Thank you.
We've got about 20 minutes here.
Please. Sure. Is there anybody else, Rob, up in there? or-
No, this was it.
Okay,
This is it.
Great, okay,
Yeah.
good.
We did it. We counted duck heads.
If
Yeah.
we're ever going to lose anybody, this is going to be the place. We'll leave
Yeah.
someone in the bathroom or something.
Nobody using the lifeguard stand bathroom, so that was open when I left.
I'm just gonna jump on and do a quick shot of the hole.
Okay.
What were you running for?
Huh?
What were you running down the?
To get the lifeguard stand, everything opened up so people could go.
How many showed up?
I think 6.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's all just 6?
Yeah.
Looked like more than that, headed that way.
Maybe I thought 6, maybe more. Well, there's a restroom there. Vantage point's a little bit better there. I'm okay for now. Thanks.
Okay.
You got Lindsay Lohan?
Okay, Michael. Thanks. This one's going to be a little
He's
tricky.
not
This
coming
get,
back.
yeah, I did it this morning. It's just a little tricky.
Is he gonna? He's gonna go ahead then, I would imagine.
I don't know whether Lloyd's. I don't know where Lloyd is.
He's not coming back.
He's
Are
not?
you ready to get started again? You want me to,
He jumped off.
I think
Okay.
so. Nedley, Lloyd's not coming back.
Right, no,
Right.
Lloyd.
Yes, they're doing some rehab.
I read about that.
we're good?
Yeah, we're all set.
Okay. As we make our way towards the fourth and final stop, which is the Lake Worth Pier, just have a few closing remarks here about the Phipps project. Just as the Midtown project benefits the downdrift beaches, the beaches to the south of Midtown, the Phipps Ocean Park project benefits the beaches in the southern portion of Reach 7 and as we move into Reach 8. There are portions of Reach 7 south of Phipps Park, south of the Par 3 golf course, that were threatened back in 2006, and after that project, what we have today is an established dune, even under the conditions from Sandy, an established dune and still a beach there. If you want to follow along with the sheet that I handed out, you can see some of the pictures for the Lake Worth Pier. Because of the conditions today, you're not going to be able to see the sandbar on both north and south. The view just immediately offshore of the pier. Looking to the north of the pier is where the Reach 7 project has directly benefited the Lake Worth Municipal Beach. Before the 2006 project, that beach was very, very narrow, and the lifeguard stands were actually up in the roadway. And today, while it is a narrow beach, there is a small dune there. Lifeguard stands are on the beach, and they're a much better situation than they were before we constructed the 2006 project. What we want to do moving forward is to see how can we benefit the Reach 8 beaches that are south of the pier. We know that there's a lot of work ahead with permitting hurdles. The most recent application, or back in the mid-2000s, there was an administrative challenge done after we were to receive that permit from the state, and following that administrative challenge, we were denied the permit. So we weren't unable to construct that beach project south of the pier. Moving forward, we want to look for any opportunities to protect this section of shoreline south of the pier. The only other option right now, pending any additional permits, is dune restoration, which we actively do, and we construct them concurrently with our Phipps Ocean Park project. But moving forward, we want to see, are there anything else we can do besides dune restoration? Can we do a beach project, a smaller project than what was proposed and the permit was ultimately denied? Can we do a project with structures? all those alternatives will need to be considered through what's called an environmental impact statement study. It's a requirement by the federal government, requirement by the federal regulatory agencies before any project could receive a permit that an EIS is conducted in this area. This study can take up to 2 years to complete. There was a study that had begun by Palm Beach County, and they had, in February of this year, they had decided to stop that study. So the town, most recently in our conversations, we're looking to restart that study again. We're working through the details right now administratively and logistically to be able to take over that project. Instead of the EIS only incorporating the last 2,000 feet of the town of Palm Beach, it would potentially extend all the way to the pier. So since there's more of the town involved, the town would be assuming that role. All this information is pending also the receipt of our review from Woods Hole Group. Once they complete their analysis and evaluation of our coastal program and give us recommendations, that will be also something that they'll be weighing in on to see if it's advantageous for us to complete that EIS. Am I missing anything?
Exactly what they're going to see when they look north. Tell them we're going out on the pier.
Yeah, we are going to step out onto the pier, and I'm sorry if I touched on the north side, but if you look, when you go to the pier and look to the south side, that is a portion of Reach 8 where there is no beach nourishment right now. It's just dune restoration. Just as the whole town has various states of recovery, Reach 8 also is in various states of recovery after Sandy. There are some sections that are doing obviously better than others. The beaches are lowered in elevation, and the dunes have been impacted at different degrees. The section that you'll immediately look when you look south of the Lake Worth Pier is not a critically eroded beach according to the state's determination.
I'm surprised they didn't lose one.
Ever seen me? Okay.
I know. I'm surprised they didn't lose one.
If anyone has any questions about the whole tour, after we conclude this last stop, Peter's going to have the microphone, and both of us will be able to answer any questions that you have regarding this stop and the other 3 stops, and any question about the coastal program in general. And well, remember, if you guys would like to reach out to me at any point, I'm available.
How deep is it down here, do you
Can it muffle the, it's got the wind muffler on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So tell me, what do you think about the trip today with the Civic Association and Citizens Association?
Absolutely fantastic. I don't think there's ever been a trip like this before in the history of the town of Palm Beach. It's only by seeing actually what the condition of the beaches are that you can see what the problems are as well. So I am really blown away, literally as well as figuratively, by this terrific tour.
What do you think the biggest issues are on the beach right now?
Well, there are several of them. Of course, we've got to preserve what we have and try not to lose beaches due to these frequent storms.
Can I get you to repeat the question
Yeah.
in the answer?
Yeah,
So I think
okay.
the biggest problems with the beach, that kind of.
Yeah, okay.
So what do you think the biggest problems on the beach are today?
The biggest problem on the beach is how are we going to preserve these beaches? Because if we don't do that, we will lose this barrier island. And if we lose this barrier island, it would be a financial and ecological disaster.
So what do you think the town council will start working on?
Well, that's the rub, so to speak, what the town council will have to do. The town council will have to find up between $60 to $100 million worth of beach restoration and preservation over the next 10 years. And how are we going to do that without ruining the tax base of the town is the real conundrum that the town council faces.
Good,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. What the hell?
So what do you think about this tour today? If you could just give us an idea of, the Civic Association role in the tour.
It's the longest amount of time I've ever spent talking about groins. 3 hours of groin discussion. You see firsthand the incredible difficulty that we all face trying to deal with the ocean in a time where, for whatever reason, water has risen higher, both in the inlet and out here, and the difficulty of trying to protect property and hold sand on the beach. It's an incredibly complex problem to deal with and resolve. So it's everybody's issue. There's no question. We'll all have to do everything we can, but it is complex.
What do you think about the Civic Association's role in this issue?
Well, we certainly have to be as supportive as we can against what's possible. Fortunately, we have many members and board members that are closely associated with the Shore Protection and Shore Protection Organization. It actually was a Civic Association committee years ago before it became a municipal committee for shore protection. So I think we have many people that are well versed in it, and I live on the water too. I certainly am. I live on the water in Nantucket too, so I get it both ways. There is only so much that can be done in a certain period of time, and I wish we could speed it up. I wish we could do multiple things at the same time, and perhaps that's possible with cooperation between Corps of Engineers, the county, the town, the state of Florida, the EPA, and everybody has to be a participant here.
What do you think about this new committee that's been formed by the Civic Association and the Citizens Association to address this?
Well, I think it's excellent, we have to get everybody on board here, and we're going to have to explain that the projects have to be practical enough to have a life expectancy, which can justify the high cost that goes into them, and that's very difficult to do, but it's got to be done.
Okay, great. Anything else you can think of that you want to tell the town or tell members?
Well, I'm going to go back and carefully think about my groins.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Hopefully this has been helpful and informative and maybe even a little fun today. We've got a little more information we want to share with you, and then we'll open it up for questions as we ride back up to the parking lot and finish up for today. And if you have questions that you don't get a chance to answer during the Q&A part of this, Rob and I will be happy to hang around for as long as necessary up in the parking lot to answer particular questions if you do have additional thoughts you want to discuss with us up there. But one of the questions that's arisen a couple of times along the route is why we don't have a federal project here in town. And I want to explain what a federal project is and explain why we don't have one here. We were originally pursuing that classification to have the federal government be a partner and a leading partner in the construction of our projects here in town. Back in the 1980s, when the first comprehensive coastal management plan was completed and the town began a permitting process for Midtown, the thought was at that time that we would follow the model that is very common up in the Northeast, especially in New Jersey, but it exists elsewhere in Florida and Carolinas, where the federal government agrees to the approach that's going to be used to manage a particular segment of shoreline, and then it becomes what's called a federal project. There's an act of Congress that authorizes the project, and Congress appropriates federal money to help pay a substantial amount of the cost of the project. The town was pretty close to obtaining that designation just for the Midtown, not for our whole program, because our whole program was in its infancy and there was a lot of it was just conceptual at that point. But the Midtown project was pretty well defined. We were obtaining permits for it. But there was a tremendous amount of concern in town about the long-term commitment. If you do a federal project, you're signing on for a 50-year relationship with the federal government and an obligation to come back and do the renourishments that are needed throughout that time. And there was a desire, as there is still today, as there always will be, among many residents in town to have a more permanent solution, something that didn't require you to come back and keep placing sand. And the town council at that time made a decision, this is back in 1991, to maybe late 1990, to install the PEP reef. We talked earlier about the PEP reef. It was an experimental reef at the Midtown area. It was intended to be a lower cost and more permanent solution instead of using sand. Because it was experimental, the federal government wouldn't participate in that. By the time 1995 came around and the monitoring of the PEP reef had determined that it was not helping the situation but actually making it worse, and we shifted gears into obtaining a permit and constructing the Midtown Beach project for the first time. And by that time, there had been a change in the federal government's approach to these projects, and for economic reasons and other reasons, the federal government had stopped authorizing new federal projects. So there is still a tremendous amount of shoreline on the east coast of the United States that is designated as federal project, where they're playing out the 50-year period that in some cases began in the early 90s, in some cases began back in the 60s, maybe even earlier than that. But those are the federal projects that are still being constructed. There aren't any new ones being authorized, and that window has now closed, so that's not even really a factor for us anymore. We do get a tremendous amount of help from the state government, both in helping us decide what to do in the permitting processes and the environmental considerations, and funding. The town has received millions of dollars of state aid to help us construct our beaches. The formula for how much we're entitled to receive of state aid for our projects is based on the how much public area of shoreline is involved. So in areas of the town where the shoreline is more privately owned, we're not eligible, or we're only eligible for a little bit of state aid. At the Midtown area and in Reach 7 at the Phipps project, because we have large segments of public beach, we do, and restrooms that are available to the public. We receive a substantial amount of state aid for those areas. There's an element of this that we haven't talked that much about that I think is really important for you to have a full understanding of how these decisions get made and why we're on the path that we're on, and that is the incredible amount of engineering and data and analysis that goes into these projects. There's a great temptation for us, probably in all aspects of life. I know there's things I don't know much about that I look at and think I know how to address them or fix them or make them better. All of us have an opinion about the shoreline, particularly when we look at the areas like we have seen some today that are a little more scary to look at. We've got a narrower beach, a lower beach, waves that are looking a little more intimidating. There's a tendency to say, boy, I know what we need to do. I saw something work in Jersey or wherever, the Carolinas or whatever it might be, someplace else in Florida, and why don't we just do X, whatever X might be? The main reason why is because we can't, even if we wanted to, because of the environmental permitting that's required and the rigorous regulations you need to comply with, because it's a very fragile set of environmental conditions out there. But there's also a good common sense practical reason, which is that there are better and worse solutions, and because this work is so very expensive, it's important for us to identify as best we can the best way to go about it, the way that's likely to be the most enduring protection for the millions of dollars we're going to invest in any particular solution. So there's data collected all the time. There's engineering surveys, there's environmental surveys, there's engineering analysis that's done. There's modeling that's done so that they predict how they think certain types of features, either structural or sandy features, are going to perform. And all of that becomes an integral part of the permitting process that helps convince the state and the federal government and those agencies that are responsible for protecting the environmental resources that we really have designed a responsible solution. But it's also how we help satisfy ourselves that it's the right investment of town funds, that it's not going to be something that we're going to spend a large amount of money on and then regret. That's an ongoing process all the time, but it's very data-driven, it's very analytical. And one element of that is because it is so technical, the permits that we do receive for the projects that we are allowed to build always come with strings attached. They always come with conditions that say, you have to do a certain amount of monitoring of this type or that type, sometimes with strings attached that require mitigation to be constructed. So we've got several places offshore where we have constructed reefs, artificial man-made reefs that will offset the areas that we have covered with some of our sand that were natural rock features that supported the environment. So there is an element of our program that no matter what is decided here in these months ahead, we'll have to continue on because we have legal obligations to continue with some of that monitoring and with some additional mitigation activity. What's the baseline number? Probably something like $30 million over the 10-year period. But beyond that, everything that we spend above and beyond that needs to be a community decision. We need to finish the process that we're well underway with now of collecting information, analyzing that information, getting expert advice on it, weighing the pros and cons with the community, having you engaged as you are today, and coming to town council meetings and offer your opinion to the shore board and to the council, and then we'll together make decisions about how to proceed with this in the way that we think is the smartest, most cost-effective way to provide a substantially increased level of protection to the shoreline and maintain it properly over the next decade. The funding decision that will come alongside that and be an equal element of the decision making. There's the engineering part of it, but then what can we afford and how can we pay for it? What's the way forward there? Three basic alternatives for that we can collect taxes that are just general taxes, part of the town's annual budget, part of the tax bill that you all receive every year to pay for all the variety of services that are provided to you. I would note one non-coastal footnote. Please do recognize that the county is the tax collector under Florida law, and there's a lot of other entities that are on that tax bill, and so when you pay your property taxes each year, only 17 cents out of every dollar comes to the town. We try to do what we do for you in a cost-effective manner. That's the end of my ad, but 83 cents out of every dollar you pay is going to either the school district or the county or other taxing districts that are part of our area. But within that 17 cents, and that would have to increase some, we do currently pay for the beach work out of that now. No matter what level of commitment is made over the next decade, we do expect some amount of tax increase required in order to pay for it. And that could be as simple as just increasing the tax rate and collecting it with the general taxes. It could be collected separately, still from general taxes, still equally applied based on the property values throughout the town, but as a separate item on the tax bill so that it would appear separately as something like a Town of Palm Beach Coastal Protection Fund rather than general taxes, so that you would still be paying it in the same manner, but you would see it very clearly identified as something separate from all the general operations of town government. And a third option would be assessment, some sort of a system that would differentiate oceanfront property owners from the other property owners in town, where there would be some disproportionate amount that would be paid by oceanfront owners because they are directly there on the area where this work is occurring, and some lesser amount being paid by the general taxpayers of the town. At this point in time, town council hasn't made a decision about the first option versus the second option, but has decided several years ago that the policy of the town as of now is to pay for this with taxes rather than with assessments. But as we get into final decision making on the full scale of this program, when we get up into 60 and 70 and $100 million potentially worth of work to do, one of the factors that will have to be considered is, those three choices of how to pay for it, not just which are the proper engineering solutions. I think I'm finished. BMA. Thank you, Mayor. I'm not quite finished. Sorry. One other really important element, and we mentioned it on the way south, but I didn't really get a chance to say much in detail about it, and I think it's important for you to know these details, and then I'll try to go through it as quickly as I can so that we do have time for questions. There's something that we're very close to finish with called a BMA, a Beach Management Agreement, and it is the result, a really wonderful potential here that we will indeed have a new way of doing business related to the environmental regulation of the shoreline. We've asked for this for a long time, not just the town, but all of the oceanfront municipalities and counties in Florida have been pressing to the state of Florida for a very long time, and to the federal government. There must be a better way of doing business. That for us to have to work for 2 or 3 years to get a permit and spend sometimes duration, the state of Florida asks the President of the United States to declare that there's a disaster area here, and then the President does, and it opens up the door for FEMA money. That has not happened here, in large part because of how devastated other areas of the country are compared to what's happened here. But we do think it's warranted. It has happened in the past where we've had a presidential declaration just for coastal protective work, not for any other kind of damages inland, which we had very little of, but for putting sand back onto a beach that got seriously eroded from a storm. And so we've appealed to the state of Florida to appeal the decision of the federal government. Indication is that the state will appeal. They've got until the end of the month to file that appeal, but that hasn't been filed yet. If they do appeal, and if a presidential declaration is granted for this, then FEMA would pay more than half of the cost. We've estimated that the cost of doing dune restoration work to place some additional amount of sand in at the bottom of the eroded dunes, just to give some additional protection through this winter, would be about $6 million. And FEMA would pay more than half of that if there is a presidential declaration. Our staff advice to the town council up until now, and the decision of the town council up until now, is don't spend that $6 million. The situation out here, even though it looks a little scary in spots, does not warrant spending $6 million of town money for that purpose. But if it either becomes worse during the winter, or if FEMA money becomes available during the winter, then it's something we could act quickly to mobilize a project to take advantage of that situation. Other questions? Okay, when we get back, I'm going to hand it back to Lou Crampton here, but as I said, Rob and I will be happy to stay in the parking lot as long as any of you want to stay there and ask us any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you.